Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Sarah Martinez carried the silver tray with the precision of someone who'd spent years moving through danger. 8 steaming cups of coffee, arranged perfectly, not a drop spilled. She moved silently between the suits and uniforms seated around the glossy oak table, invisible in plain sight. To them, she was just another catering server, a background figure meant to blend in and disappear. But beneath that neatly pressed uniform and polite smile was a woman who had once led men into war. The room was packed with high-ranking officials, generals, admirals, contractors, government advisors. Henderson Defense Solutions was hosting a closed-door meeting, and billions of dollars in defense projects were on the line. Words like security initiatives, classified assets, and operational losses floated through the air between the clink of coffee cups and the hum of air conditioning. Sarah didn't belong here, not anymore. At least that's what she kept telling herself. "Excuse me, miss," barked Colonel Peterson, his voice sharp, commanding. "This coffee's cold. Bring a fresh pot and make sure it's hot this time." She nodded quietly, "Yes, sir." Her tone was calm, measured, the same tone she'd used to report enemy positions over a radio once upon a time. He didn't know that. None of them did. To them, she was no one, just a server. As she crossed the room to refill the pot, her reflection flashed in the mirror along the far wall, straight posture, perfect movements, eyes alert but tired. She hated how easily she had learned to be invisible. After years of leading missions where silence meant survival, invisibility had become second nature. But this wasn't the kind of invisible she could be proud of. This was small, domestic, empty. She glanced back at the table. The men argued over maps and numbers, but their words hit her like echoes from another life. They were talking about Afghanistan, about a failed mission, about soldiers who never made it home. "Our team walked right into an ambush," said General Harrison, his voice low, heavy with frustration. "3 good men lost because someone didn't do their homework." Sarah froze mid-step. The air seemed to thicken. She knew that mission. Her pulse quickened, her breathing slowed, automatic training kicking in. She carefully poured a fresh pot of coffee, her hands steady as stone, though inside her heart was pounding. She knew exactly what had gone wrong with that operation because she had been there. The intelligence hadn't been faulty, it had been ignored. She remembered the warnings she'd sent up the chain of command, the hesitation in her gut when she'd seen the data, the moment she'd chosen to follow orders instead of her instincts, and the cost that choice had carried. "More sugar, please," Admiral Chen interrupted, glancing up just long enough to see her sleeve slide slightly up her arm. Just for a moment, just long enough. A faint line of ink, the top of a tattoo, nearly hidden beneath fabric. Sarah tugged her sleeve back down quickly. No one noticed, or so she thought. She continued moving around the table, the quiet ghost in a room full of noise. The conversation grew louder, arguments sharper. Men who'd never smelled cordite or heard the crack of gunfire were debating strategy like chess players. "The problem with special forces," Colonel Peterson boomed, "is that they think they're untouchable. No discipline, no respect for command. Cowboys, the lot of them." Sarah's jaw tightened. Cowboys, he said it like an insult. He didn't understand, couldn't understand. She'd led one of those so-called cowboy teams. Men who'd followed her into darkness without hesitation. Men who had trusted her judgment with their lives. They had died for that trust. Still, she stayed silent. She refilled their cups, cleaned their spills, moved like background music, present but unnoticed. Only one man in the room seemed to look at her differently. General Morrison sat quietly at the far end, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and watchful. When Sarah poured his coffee, he actually looked at her, not through her. "Thank you," he said softly, genuine warmth in his voice. "You're welcome, sir," she replied automatically. A reflex, a response from muscle memory. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried recognition. but she turned away before she could see what lingered behind it. The meeting dragged on. Papers shuffled, tempers rose, and Sarah kept serving. Beneath her calm exterior, her thoughts were storming. Every discussion about budgets and operations pulled her back to the world she'd left behind, the world that had nearly broken her. When the last of the officials began gathering their things, she let out a quiet breath of relief. Just another job done. Another day blending in. Another reminder of how far she'd fallen. Then, as she reached for General Morrison's cup, his voice stopped her. "You missed a spot," he said quietly, pointing to a faint stain on the edge of the table. She leaned over to wipe it. Her sleeve slipped again. This time, the tattoo was impossible to miss. The silver trident, the Navy SEAL insignia, gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. The general's hand froze mid-motion. His eyes narrowed, recognition flashing instantly across his face. Sarah felt it, that electric shift in the air. She straightened, tugging her sleeve down fast, but she knew it was too late. "That's interesting ink you've got there," he said, voice calm but probing. Sarah's stomach twisted. She forced a faint, polite smile. "Just an old tattoo, sir." But the general wasn't buying it. She could see his mind working, analyzing her stance, her breathing, the way she scanned exits without even realizing it. The subtle habits you never unlearn after a lifetime in the field. He waited until the last officer left the room. Then he spoke softly. "How long have you been out?" The words hit her like a quiet explosion. She hesitated. Lying would be useless, not with a man like him. His tone wasn't accusatory, it was knowing. Soldier to soldier. 18 months, she admitted. "And you're working catering. It pays the bills." He studied her for a long moment. "What's your real name?" "Sarah Martinez." Something shifted in his eyes, the flicker of memory. Martinez, Operation Red Dawn, wasn't it? Her spine stiffened before she could stop it. That name hadn't been spoken aloud in almost 2 years. She swallowed hard. "I can't discuss classified operations, sir." "You can't," he said with a small, knowing smile, "or you will." "Both." He nodded slowly. "I thought so. I read about that mission. Hostage rescue, 12 Americans saved. High-value target eliminated. The reports called the team leader exceptional under fire." Sarah said nothing. The silence said enough. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Is someone like you serving coffee instead of serving her country?" The question landed like a punch to the chest. Because she'd lost everything that gave her life meaning. Because she couldn't look in a mirror without seeing the faces of the men who trusted her and died because of her decision. Because it was easier to hide than to lead again. But she didn't say any of that. She just murmured, "Circumstances changed." "What kind of circumstances?" For the first time in a long while, she met someone's eyes and didn't look away. Maybe it was the quiet respect in his tone. Maybe she was just tired of carrying it all alone. "I lost my team," she said softly. "All of them bad intel. We walked into a trap." He was silent, let her speak. "I was the one who recommended trusting that intel," she continued, voice trembling just slightly. "I knew something felt wrong, but I followed orders. 4 men died because I didn't push harder. Their families never got the truth. And I couldn't stay." General Morrison exhaled slowly, his face grave. "That kind of guilt doesn't go away easily." "No, sir, it doesn't." He nodded thoughtfully. "But guilt doesn't mean failure, Lieutenant. Sometimes it just means you cared enough to feel the weight." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the kindness in his tone. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please. I should finish cleaning up." "Your supervisor can wait. This is more important." She hesitated, then set the tray down and sat opposite him, the same table where moments ago she'd been invisible. "Tell me," he said, leaning forward, "what made you join in the first place?" Sarah stared at the empty coffee cup between them. My father was a Marine. He used to tell me that serving meant becoming part of something bigger than yourself. I wanted that. And you found it, Morrison said gently, until you lost it. She nodded. I've seen your record, he continued. Commendations, rapid promotion, successful extractions. You were one of the youngest women ever to lead a SEAL team. You've been researching me. He smiled faintly. Just now, I made a few calls. You were respected, still are, even after what happened. Sarah looked away. Respect doesn't bring them back. No, Morrison said quietly, but what you do next can honor them. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I run a special division for the Department of Defense, he explained. We evaluate military contractor proposals, determine which ones will actually work, and which ones will get people killed. I could use someone with your background. Sarah blinked. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to stop hiding, Morrison said. You won't be back in the field. You'll be behind a desk, using your experience to keep others alive. She hesitated. The idea was terrifying and tempting. What if I'm not ready? Then take time. But ask yourself, is your guilt more important than the good you could still do? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and heavy. For the first time since leaving the Navy, Sarah didn't have an answer. She couldn't sleep that night. The words replayed in her head over and over. Is your guilt more important than the good you could still do? Sarah lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room the only sound. The place was as empty as she felt, 4 bare walls, 1 flickering lamp, a bed that creaked when she turned. The metal box sat untouched on the closet shelf, the way it had for 18 months. Inside it were memories she couldn't bear to look at, the trident, the ribbons, the folded mission patches that smelled faintly of sand and gun oil. She packed them away the day she walked out of the Navy, told herself it was temporary, told herself she was starting over. But starting over had turned into hiding. Now some general she'd barely met had ripped open everything she tried to bury. She sat up, ran a hand through her hair and exhaled. You can't fix ghosts, she muttered to herself. But then her gaze drifted to the business card on the table, white, crisp, official. General Daniel Morrison, Department of Defense, Strategic Analysis Division. That card wasn't just paper, it was a doorway, a second chance, a risk. She poured herself a cup of coffee and opened her notebook, the same battered field journal she used to plan missions. On the first page, she wrote 2 words in block letters, pros/cons. Old habits. Pros. Use my training again. Help others. Purpose. Honor the team. Cons. Face the past. Be reminded every day. Fail again. Her pen hovered over the last one. Fail again. That was the real fear. It wasn't the memories. It was the possibility of another mistake, another life lost because of her decision. Her phone buzzed on the table. Maria, her sister. She hadn't talked to her in weeks. Hey, Sarah said softly, forcing a lighter tone. Sarah, finally, I thought you'd vanished again. I've been busy. How's everyone? Good, the kids miss you. Miguel started Little League. Sophia's learning the piano. Sarah smiled faintly. Tell them Aunt Sarah's proud. Maria hesitated. You sound tired, you okay? Yeah, just thinking about work. Catering. Sarah laughed quietly. Yeah, catering. She didn't have the heart to explain. To them, she was managing events, maybe wearing a headset and clipboard, not carrying trays and scrubbing tables. You should visit, you know, Maria said softly. It's been months. Mom asks about you every Sunday. I will, Sarah promised, soon. There was a pause. You know, Maria continued carefully, Dad used to say the hardest part of service wasn't the fighting, it was what came after, learning to live with it. Sarah's chest tightened. Yeah, she whispered, he was right. After the call, the silence in the apartment grew heavy again. She stared down at the list in her notebook. Pros, cons. It didn't matter how she framed it, the scales would never balance. Guilt didn't obey logic. But maybe purpose did. She closed the notebook, stared at Morrison's card, and picked up her phone. When he answered, his voice was calm, composed, military. "Morrison." "Sir, this is Sarah Martinez," she said. Her tone was steady, though her hands were shaking. "I've made my decision." He didn't rush her. "I'm listening." "I accept the offer." There was a beat of silence, then a smile in his voice. "Good. How about Monday?" "Monday works." "Excellent. Welcome back, Sarah." When the call ended, she sat still for a long moment, half terrified, half relieved. For the first time in 18 months, she had a reason to wake up. She looked toward the closet. The metal box was waiting. Slowly, almost reverently, she pulled it down. The latch clicked open and the past spilled out, metal glinting in the dim light. The trident badge lay on top, heavy, cold. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its surface. "Don't make them regret believing in you," she whispered to herself. Then she placed it on the table, not back in the box. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray dawn that carried weight. The Pentagon loomed ahead, vast and immovable, its stone walls breathing history. The building had always felt alive to her, not with mystery but with memory. She'd been here once before, wearing a uniform and a purpose. Now she wore a dark business suit and uncertainty. Security was tight, as expected. Multiple checkpoints, ID verification, metal detectors. Each beep of the scanner reminded her she was stepping back into a world she'd sworn off. But the moment the final gate opened, something inside her steadied. She wasn't just re-entering the system, she was confronting it. General Morrison met her by the elevator, his expression warm but professional. "Sarah, right on time." "Would have been late if I hadn't left before sunrise," she replied lightly. He smiled. "Old habits die hard." As they walked down the corridor, Sarah noticed the difference immediately. Everyone moved with purpose. Civilian clothes, yes, but the posture, the bearing, the eyes that scanned and assessed everything. Former soldiers, every one of them. "This division," Morrison said, "exists for one reason: to keep reality connected to policy. The people upstairs approve missions based on data. We make sure that data reflects the world as it actually is." "Less politics," Sarah murmured, "more truth." "Exactly." He led her to a corner office. A nameplate already gleamed on the door: Sarah Martinez, Senior Tactical Consultant. The sight froze her. She'd expected a cubicle, a temporary station, something small. Not this. Not respect. "This is yours," Morrison said simply. "Computer access, secure line, and a stack of classified headaches waiting on your desk." She smiled despite herself. "Feels strange seeing my name on a door again." "It'll feel normal soon enough." He gestured toward the folder on her desk. "Classified, stamped in red. That's your first assignment. A contractor's proposing a hostage rescue operation in Syria. Your job: decide if their plan will save lives or cost them." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Hostage rescue, first day back and you give me déjà vu." "Exactly why I chose it," he said quietly. "You've been there, you'll see what others might miss." When he left, Sarah sat down and opened the file. Photos, maps, reconnaissance reports, all too familiar. A team of 12 operators, 3 hostages, a target compound near Aleppo. On paper it was clean. Too clean. Her instincts flared immediately. The satellite images looked staged, guard posts placed too perfectly, angles too symmetrical. The proposed entry route was direct, almost ideal, and the backup plan non-existent. Her pen tapped against the table in rhythm with her heartbeat. She flipped through the intelligence summaries, marking details with surgical precision. Words like probable, estimated, assumed jumped out at her. Dangerous words, words that had once haunted her. By noon, she'd filled 3 pages of notes and underlined a single sentence. The intel is too perfect. When Morrison stopped by her office, she didn't hesitate. "Sir, this plan has problems." He looked intrigued. "Go on." "The intelligence is too recent, too consistent. No unpredictability. Either it's fabricated or cherry-picked. And the entry route," she pointed to the map. "Crossfire from 2 positions here and here. No safe fallback route. They're walking into a trap." He nodded slowly. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be." "Would you recommend proceeding?" "No," she said firmly. "Not yet. Not without corroborating intel and alternate routes. If they launch this mission as written, people die." For a moment, the old fire in her voice startled her. It had been buried for so long. Morrison smiled faintly. "That's the voice I was hoping to hear." But then she hesitated. "Sir, I have to be honest. This kind of mission, it's close to what went wrong before. I don't know if I'm being objective or just cautious." He studied her for a long moment. "Sarah, I hired you because you are cautious, because you've seen what others haven't. Objectivity doesn't mean emotionless. It means honest, and you're being honest." She nodded slowly. "Then my recommendation stands." That evening, she walked out of the Pentagon just as the sun dipped behind the river. The wind was cold, but it felt clean. Her phone buzzed. Maria again. "So," her sister asked, "first day?" Sarah smiled, stepping into the glow of the streetlights. "Better than I expected. It felt right." "Right how?" "Like I'm where I'm supposed to be." "You sound like your old self." "Yeah," Sarah said quietly. "I think she's still in there somewhere." When she got home, she didn't turn on the TV or the lights. She walked straight to the table where her Trident badge still lay, reflecting the streetlight through the window. For the first time since she'd left the Navy, she didn't look at it with pain but with gratitude. She had lost a team once, but now she was part of a mission again, one that might save others from the same fate. She picked up the badge, felt its cold weight, and whispered, "We're not done yet." The phone on her desk rang before sunrise. It wasn't unusual, not here. Urgency was the air they breathed at the Pentagon. Still, something in the tone of the internal line made her pulse quicken. "Martinez," she answered, voice crisp. "Report to conference room B, immediate meeting," the aide said. "General Morrison wants you there." Sarah grabbed her notes and her badge, heart steadying into the calm rhythm she knew too well, the same rhythm before a mission, the quiet before action. When she entered the room, it was already packed. Top brass, analysts, civilian contractors, and at the head of the table Colonel Peterson, the same man who'd once called Special Forces undisciplined cowboys. The irony hit her like a flicker of lightning. Months ago, she'd been serving coffee at this exact table. Now she was here as an equal. Peterson was already talking, his voice firm and confident. "We have a developing situation in Yemen. A CIA operative has been captured by Houthi rebels. Our window to extract him is closing fast." On the central monitor, satellite images of desert compounds and supply routes appeared. The plan was bold, almost reckless. "Special Operations Command proposes insertion in 48 hours, Peterson continued. 2 helicopters, 12 operators. Objective: recover the asset before he's moved across the border." Sarah's instincts flared again. 48 hours. Too soon, too clean, too familiar. She began reading the digital briefing, scanning for the telltale signs, rushed intelligence, unverified sources, assumptions disguised as facts. Morrison caught her eye across the room, giving a subtle nod that said, "I trust your read." Sarah stood. "Sir, may I ask when this intelligence was gathered?" Peterson looked up, slightly irritated. 48 hours ago. A local informant provided the compound's layout and guard details. Has this informant provided actionable intelligence before? Not directly related to U.S. personnel, Peterson admitted, but his information on enemy movement has been reliable. Sarah's voice stayed calm, controlled. So we're planning a rescue mission based on a single local source with no record of confirmed extractions. Peterson frowned. That's how time-sensitive operations work, consultant. Time-sensitive doesn't mean blind, she replied quietly. The room went still. She knew this tension, the room full of people wanting to move fast to do something, because doing nothing felt like failure. But she also knew what happened when emotion replaced strategy. Morrison broke the silence. Continue, Ms. Martinez. Sarah turned the display toward her. Sir, if you look here, the informant's data is too perfect. Guard rotations, vehicle routes, watch towers, all symmetrical. Enemy strongholds rarely operate with this level of order. It feels staged. Peterson crossed his arms. Are you suggesting a trap? I'm suggesting caution, she said evenly. I've seen this before. Clean intelligence like this has a way of being bait. He bristled. Our operators are trained to adapt. You can't plan for every variable. Maybe not every variable, Sarah countered, but you can avoid walking straight into an ambush. Her tone wasn't emotional, it was firm, almost surgical. But beneath it was a quiet tremor, the echo of the mission that had gone wrong. Peterson smirked faintly. You left the field, didn't you, Martinez? Maybe you've forgotten that hesitation costs lives. The jab hit deeper than she expected, but she didn't flinch. And so does arrogance, Colonel. The words hung in the air, heavy. For a moment no one breathed, then Morrison cleared his throat. Let's stay on point. Ms. Martinez, what's your recommendation? Sarah exhaled slowly. Every pair of eyes in the room was on her, generals, analysts, policymakers. This was the kind of pressure she used to feel in combat when every call meant life or death. I recommend delaying the operation by 36 hours, she said. Verify the informant's data through a secondary source. Conduct drone surveillance to confirm the prisoner's location. If possible, monitor guard rotation patterns for anomalies. Peterson snapped. We don't have 36 hours. Every hour we wait, that operative's life is at risk. Sarah met his stare, unwavering. And every minute you rush increases the risk for 12 other lives. If this operation fails, you don't just lose the prisoner, you lose the rescue team too. Her words were sharper now, the edge of someone who had lived the consequences of silence. The colonel's jaw tightened. We can't afford to play it safe. Safe isn't the goal, Sarah said quietly. Successful is. Another pause. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Finally, Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Martinez, if this were your mission and your team. She hesitated, then closed her eyes briefly. She saw their faces again. Jackson, Rodriguez, Williams, Thompson, the laughter before deployment, the trust in their eyes before the storm. When she opened her eyes, they were clear and steady. If this were my team, sir, she said, I'd tell them to wait. I'd rather have one man held hostage for another day than bury 12. The silence that followed was different this time, not dismissive, but heavy with consideration. Morrison nodded slowly. Understood, let's take a recess. The corridor outside felt colder than usual. Sarah stepped out, trying to steady her breathing. Every nerve in her body was alive, but this wasn't fear. It was something closer to responsibility, that razor-thin line between courage and doubt. Morrison joined her a moment later. You handled yourself well in there. Did I? She asked. I might have just derailed an operation. He gave a faint smile. Or you might have saved it. Sarah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You know they hate me for questioning it. Let them, Morrison said. They're not used to people speaking truth in a room full of rank. She let out a quiet breath, half a laugh. I didn't come here to make friends. No, Morrison said softly. You came here to make a difference. 2 hours later, the meeting reconvened. Morrison's tone was formal now. Based on the assessment provided by Ms. Martinez, the operation will be delayed 36 hours for additional verification. Recommendations have been forwarded to Field Command. Peterson didn't hide his displeasure. His expression said everything, that she just undermined him, that she was an outsider meddling in real decisions. But the order was official now. The mission would wait. Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence was her armor. That night she couldn't shake the unease. She'd done what she believed was right, but the old doubt crept in like fog. What if I was wrong again? What if this time, waiting costs a life instead of saving one? She opened her laptop and pulled up old mission reports, ones that looked eerily similar to this one. Rushed timelines, unverified intel, perfect setups that ended in disaster, patterns, mistakes repeated by people too proud to slow down. It was all there, written in classified ink, history begging not to be repeated. 36 hours later, the update came through. The drone footage revealed everything. The compound wasn't what the informant claimed, not even close. Reinforced bunkers, double the guard numbers, hidden gun placements under tarps, and worst of all, the prisoner had already been moved. Sarah stared at the screen, jaw tightening. Her chest ached with a strange mixture of relief and anger. Relief that she'd been right. Anger that history had almost repeated itself. When Morrison walked into her office, she didn't even look up. "They would have been slaughtered," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied, "and because of your report they were." She exhaled slowly. "So the prisoner moved to a new location, but our people are alive, and now they know where to go next." Sarah leaned back, eyes closed. For a moment she could almost hear the voices of her fallen team, not accusing but proud. Morrison's tone softened. "You understand what just happened, don't you? You turned loss into wisdom. You used your pain to save others." She nodded faintly. "It doesn't make the past easier." "No," he agreed, "but it gives it meaning." The next morning, the success report hit every inbox in the division. Extraction mission modified based on new intelligence. No casualties. Operative recovered safely. Peterson didn't congratulate her. He didn't have to. The silence in the hallway when she passed him was acknowledgement enough. Morrison stopped by later with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might appreciate this, considering where we started." Sarah smirked. "Careful, General. Someone might mistake that for sentiment." "Let them," he said. "You've earned it." He set the cup down. "You know, you've already changed how this division operates. People are asking better questions, slowing down, thinking." She looked at him, genuinely surprised. "All I did was tell them what I wish someone had told me." Morrison nodded. "And that's leadership, even when you're not in command." That night Sarah walked home through the quiet streets of Arlington. The wind carried the smell of rain, sharp and clean. For the first time in a long while, her steps felt lighter. She stopped at a park bench overlooking the Potomac. The city lights shimmered across the water. 18 months ago, she'd walked away from everything. Now she wasn't just back, she was rebuilding something deeper. Not rank, not reputation. Purpose. She whispered softly into the wind, as if speaking to her lost team. "I didn't forget, I never will, but I'm finally doing something you'd be proud of." And as the first raindrop fell against her skin, she let it stay there, a quiet reminder that healing didn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes, it meant learning to stand in the rain again without fear. She could feel the shift. In the weeks that followed the Yemen mission, Sarah's name began to carry quiet weight in the hallways. Her analysis reports didn't just get read, they got circulated, quoted, debated. The officers who once overlooked her now paused when she spoke, some out of respect, others out of caution. Either way, they were listening. But influence, Sarah was learning, came with its own kind of danger. It was a Thursday morning when General Morrison called her into his office. His tone was calm, but there was tension behind it, the kind that came before a storm. "Close the door," he said. She did. He gestured toward a folder on his desk. "We've been assigned to review a high-value contract proposal, Henderson Defense Solutions." Sarah froze, that name again. The same company where she'd served coffee. The same table where her past and future had collided. Morrison caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes. "You know them." "I've worked one of their events," she admitted carefully, "before this job." He nodded slowly, reading between the lines. "Then this will be interesting." He slid the folder toward her. "They're proposing a multi-country training program, massive budget, politically sensitive. We're to evaluate its tactical and ethical soundness." She opened the folder. Pages of polished strategy documents, flowcharts, cost analyses, and glowing projections. It all looked impressive, too impressive. "They're promising full readiness in 18 months, she asked, "across 3 countries." "Correct." "That's ambitious," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Borderline reckless, depending on the regional volatility." Morrison leaned back. "Then I want you to say that honestly." Sarah nodded. "I always do." He smiled faintly. "That's what I'm counting on." By afternoon, she was knee-deep in Henderson's data. The more she read, the less she liked. Their proposal focused on efficiency, compressed training cycles, aggressive schedules, minimal cultural adaptation periods. On paper, it was efficient. In practice, it was a setup for chaos. Her notes filled with red ink. Insufficient field acclimation time. Urban combat training ignores architectural realities. Inadequate cultural integration protocols. She rubbed her temple, frustration building. Henderson's executives were smart but detached. They designed war on whiteboards, all angles and timelines, no human cost. By evening, her report was nearly complete. It was thorough, blunt, and impossible to sugarcoat. She stared at the final line before typing it. "This plan, as written, prioritizes profit over preparation, and will result in unnecessary casualties if executed without revision." She hesitated for a moment, then hit save. Truth was her only loyalty now. The next morning, the review meeting was standing room only. Henderson's senior executives had flown in personally, sleek suits, polished shoes, confident smiles. Richard Henderson himself led the delegation. Tall, silver-haired, practiced charm. The kind of man who could turn a budget report into a campaign speech. "General Morrison," Henderson said smoothly, extending his hand. "A pleasure, as always, and this must be Ms. Martinez, our newest star consultant, I hear." Sarah returned the handshake, polite but measured. "Good to meet you, sir." He smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "I trust you've had time to review our proposal." "I have," she said simply. "And—" Sarah glanced around the room. Morrison sat silently beside her, watching, not intervening. "Your plan is ambitious," she began, "and strategically promising in scope, but your timeline and training models are unrealistic." The executives shifted uncomfortably. Henderson's smile thinned. "Unrealistic how?" Sarah tapped the display on the screen behind her. "You're compressing 18 months of cross-theater training into half the recommended time frame. You're deploying trainers into regions without adequate cultural or environmental acclimation. You're underestimating logistical delays and overestimating local cooperation. In short, you're assuming everything will go perfectly. It won't." One of the executives frowned. "We've accounted for risk margins." Sarah turned to him. "No, you've calculated margins for budget, not for lives." The silence that followed was sharp. Henderson cleared his throat, recovering his composure. "Ms. Martinez, I appreciate your perspective, but perhaps you're not considering the political pressures at play. We're expected to deliver results within a set time frame. Our allies are impatient. Congress is watching." Sarah's voice was calm, but unyielding. Then they should be watching carefully enough to know that unrealistic promises create body bags. We can't measure progress in months and dollars if it's paid for in human lives. For a moment, no one moved. Even Morrison looked slightly surprised by the steel in her tone. Henderson finally spoke, voice smooth again. Strong words. You must have seen your share of mistakes out there. I've seen what happens when people are rushed into missions they're not ready for, she said softly. I buried 4 good men because of it. That silenced the room completely. The presentation ended soon after. The executives gathered their materials with practiced politeness, murmuring thanks that didn't sound sincere. When the last one left, Morrison leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Well, that was bracing. Sarah sighed. They'll hate me. Probably, Morrison said, but they'll respect you, and I'd rather have their resentment than their condolences. That evening, Sarah found herself walking the long corridor toward the observation deck, the one overlooking the Pentagon's inner courtyard. The lights glowed gold against the dusk. She rested her hands on the railing, her reflection faint in the glass. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt since Afghanistan: clarity. Not peace, not yet, but purpose, the kind that burns slow and steady instead of bright and brief. Still, purpose had its price. When she returned to her office, there was an envelope waiting on her desk, unmarked, no sender. Inside was a single typed line. Be careful how loudly you challenge the wrong people. No signature. No explanation. Her stomach sank. Henderson's warning, someone higher up. It didn't matter. The message was clear. Silence was safer. She folded the paper neatly and placed it in her drawer. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. But the note confirmed what she'd suspected. The line between truth and politics wasn't just blurred. It was dangerous. The next week, her report on Henderson's proposal circulated through the upper echelons of defense. It was praised by some, despised by others. The final decision hadn't been made yet, but she knew it would come down to one question. What's more valuable, integrity or expedience? Late one night, Morrison stopped by her office. He carried 2 cups of coffee again, their unspoken ritual. You've made powerful allies, he said, and powerful enemies. She smirked, always had a talent for that. He studied her carefully. Do you regret being blunt? She shook her head. Regret for things you didn't do. I told the truth. Whatever comes next, I can live with that. He nodded slowly. You remind me of someone I once knew. He used to say that dignity doesn't shout, it simply acts. Sarah smiled faintly. Then I'll let my actions speak. They stood in silence for a moment, both staring out the window at the city lights. Washington looked calm from up here, orderly, composed. But they both knew better. Power was never quiet. It just whispered in polished rooms. Morrison finally said, You know, Sarah, when I first met you, you were serving coffee in this building. Now you're serving something far more important: accountability. She laughed softly. Doesn't pay as well as catering. Maybe not, he said, smiling, but it matters. That night she dreamed again. Not of battle, not of loss, but of her team alive, laughing, teasing her before a mission. The kind of easy warmth that came before danger. When she woke, the ache was there, but it felt lighter. She sat at her desk, staring at the trident pin under the lamp. She left it there for weeks now, uncovered not as a wound but as a reminder. Every time she looked at it, she remembered what Morrison had said. Use your past, don't hide from it. And she was. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Henderson's project had too many eyes on it, too much money, too much power. Her report hadn't ended anything. It had started something. Something that would test her loyalty, her judgment, and her courage all over again. Because in Washington, wars weren't just fought with bullets. They were fought with silence, signatures, and the courage to tell the truth when no one wanted to hear it. and Sarah Martinez was done being silent. They started watching her. At first, it was subtle, a pause in conversation when she entered a room, a report that took longer than usual to reach her desk, an email thread she wasn't copied on anymore. Small things, easy to dismiss. But Sarah had been in enough hostile environments to recognize the pattern. Isolation always came before confrontation. Her report on Henderson Defense Solutions had stirred the wrong kind of attention. And Washington, she was learning, didn't forgive people who embarrassed the powerful. By the second week, the pressure became visible. Her access credentials were temporarily restricted for a system update. Her briefing requests sat under review. Even her colleagues, once friendly, now spoke carefully, as if associating with her too openly might be a risk. It wasn't paranoia, it was procedure. Power had ways of making inconvenient people disappear without ever firing a bullet. One afternoon, she was called to a closed-door meeting. The tone of the summons was formal, too formal. When she stepped inside, a small panel was already waiting. 3 men in dark suits, 1 woman in uniform. None of them smiled. "Ms. Martinez," said the senior officer, "please have a seat." She did. "You've been working as a senior tactical consultant under General Morrison's division for approximately 6 months, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And your recent analysis of the Henderson proposal, you stand by it?" "I do," she said, "every word." The man flipped through her report with deliberate slowness. "Your language was forceful. Some might even say accusatory. You implied that a major defense contractor was prioritizing financial gains over troop safety. That's a serious claim." Sarah met his gaze evenly. "It's a serious problem." The man sighed. "Ms. Martinez, you're a valuable asset, but you're also new to this environment. Sometimes it's better to be strategic with your truths." "I'm not strategic," she said quietly. "I'm honest." The uniformed woman leaned forward. "And honesty is commendable, but it can be inconvenient in the wrong context." Sarah could feel the trap tightening. They wanted her to retract, to soften her stance, to amend the record, anything to make the truth more palatable. "With respect," she said, "I didn't write that report to win friends. I wrote it to prevent unnecessary deaths. If that's inconvenient, I can live with it." The man closed the folder and gave a thin smile. "That's admirable. Let's hope your career can live with it too." She left the room with her heartbeat steady, her mind burning. She'd faced warlords, terrorists, and gunfire, but this kind of battle was different. Quieter, meaner, fought with paperwork instead of bullets, but capable of just as much damage. When she returned to her office, Morrison was waiting. "I've heard," he said quietly. "Of course you did." He exhaled. "They're under pressure. Henderson has friends in every branch of government. They don't like being told no." Sarah dropped into her chair. "So what happens now? I get reassigned to an office with no windows." Morrison smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how many people started that way. Listen, Sarah, don't let them intimidate you. The best analysts are the ones who make people uncomfortable." She gave him a tired look. "You're telling me truth has a price." He nodded. "Always has." She leaned back, rubbing her temples. "You ever get tired of fighting the same war, just with different weapons?" "Every day," he said, "but it's the only war that matters." That night Sarah went home and found a single letter slid under her apartment door. No envelope this time, just a folded page. "You made your point. Stop before someone decides you've made enough." No name, no signature. She stared at it for a long time, then set it down beside her trident pin. Fear was an old acquaintance. It had visited her in dark alleys, mountain caves, and enemy compounds. But this kind of fear was new, the invisible kind. The kind that came wearing a suit and carried consequences instead of weapons. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stood by the window. The city glowed below, indifferent and alive. Somewhere down there, people were laughing, sleeping, living their lives without ever knowing how fragile the truth really was. She whispered to herself, "If they think this will scare me, they've forgotten what I've already survived." The next morning, she found Morrison waiting by her office door with 2 cups of coffee. He didn't ask about the letter, didn't need to. "You still have that fire," he said quietly, "but be smart about where you point it." She took the cup, nodding. "You think I should back off?" "I think you should choose your battles. There's a difference between courage and self-destruction." She gave a small smile. "You sound like my old commanding officer." "Maybe because I've buried people who didn't know the difference." That silenced her. He was right, of course, but something inside her refused to retreat. The truth mattered, it had to. A week later, the Defense Committee held a final vote on Henderson's proposal. Sarah wasn't invited to the meeting, that alone told her enough. But late that afternoon, Morrison stepped into her office, face unreadable. "They pushed it through," he said quietly, "approved with minimal revisions." Her chest tightened. "After everything?" He nodded. "Politics won this round." She sat back, exhaling slowly. The anger wasn't explosive, it was quiet, deep, bitter. "So we're going to let them train under unrealistic standards, risk lives, just to keep donors happy." "It's not we," Morrison said gently. "It's the system." She looked up at him. "And we're part of it." He met her eyes. "That's why people like you are needed, because if everyone stays quiet, the system never changes." "Feels like shouting into a hurricane," she murmured. "Then shout louder." He smiled faintly. "Just don't lose yourself in the noise." That night Sarah didn't go home. She stayed at her desk, staring at the glowing city outside her window. Somewhere out there, soldiers would train under Henderson's new program. They'd follow flawed protocols, depend on half-complete intelligence, trust equipment that hadn't been tested properly. Some would survive anyway, some wouldn't. And she'd know she'd tried and failed to stop it. She picked up her trident badge, gripping it tight. "You died following orders," she whispered to her lost team. "I won't make that mistake again." In that moment, the decision crystallized. If the system couldn't stop itself, then she would find another way. The next morning, she met Morrison in the cafeteria. "I need access to the Henderson follow-up files," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "They're classified above our clearance now." "I know, but I can't just sit here while they put soldiers at risk." He sighed. "Sarah." She leaned forward. "You said it yourself, people like me are needed, so let me do what you hired me for." He looked at her for a long time, torn between duty and instinct. Finally, he said quietly, "If I get you access, it has to be off the record. You find anything illegal, you bring it to me, not anyone else. Understand?" She nodded, understood. Over the next few nights, Sarah worked alone. Long after the offices emptied and the lights dimmed, she combed through encrypted reports, progress audits, and internal memos. And then she found it. A discrepancy, small but damning. Henderson's cost projections listed efficiency bonuses for early completion in all 3 regions. Meaning, the faster they trained local forces, the more they got paid. Which explained everything: the rush, the shortcuts, the falsified data. She sat back, cold fury washing over her. They're trading lives for profit. By dawn, she had compiled a complete dossier, evidence clear enough to trigger an investigation. But as she reached for the encrypted upload terminal, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A male voice, calm but menacing. "Ms. Martinez, we'd advise you to stop what you're doing." Her stomach clenched. "Who is this?" "Someone who's trying to help you keep your new life. You've done good work. Don't ruin it by digging where you shouldn't." The line went dead. She stared at the phone in her hand, the blood draining from her face. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, she slid the phone aside, picked up the dossier, and whispered almost to herself, "You just confirmed everything." By noon, Morrison found her in the archive room, eyes red from lack of sleep. "Sarah," he said softly, "you found something, didn't you?" She handed him the folder. Proof. They're falsifying training data and manipulating cost metrics. The bonuses incentivize shortcuts. Soldiers will die for their bottom line. He opened the file, scanning the evidence in silence. Then quietly he said, "You realize this could blow up everything. For you, for me." "I know," she said. "But if we stay quiet, it'll blow up for someone else, someone in the field. And they won't have a choice." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that carried both admiration and dread. Finally he said, "All right, let's do this the right way. No leaks, no headlines, internal review. If we go by the book, maybe we can still fix it." Sarah nodded. "And if the book, written to protect them?" Morrison gave a tired smile. "Then we rewrite it." That night, as the city fell silent, Sarah stood by her apartment window, watching the lights flicker like restless stars. She knew what was coming. The threats would escalate. The scrutiny would tighten. The line between truth and survival would grow thinner with each passing day. But she didn't feel afraid anymore, only resolved. In the reflection of the glass, she saw herself, the woman who once carried coffee to powerful men, the woman they had ignored, underestimated, dismissed. And she whispered, quietly but fiercely, "You should have looked closer." The investigation began quietly, the way all dangerous things do. No press releases, no memos, no acknowledgement, just silent movements through back channels and encrypted systems. Morrison called it a discreet internal review. Sarah knew better. It was a storm building behind closed doors. For 2 weeks she worked under the radar, reviewing Henderson's files piece by piece. Each document told a story of manipulation, inflated performance data, doctored field assessments, ghost trainees who didn't exist on any base. The numbers lied, but the consequences wouldn't. Late one night, she sat in the secure room with Morrison. The glow of the monitors lit their faces in cold blue. "Here," she said, pointing to a chart. "They're reporting 98% training completion in regions that don't even have stable electricity." Morrison frowned. "They're fabricating progress to trigger their next payment." She nodded grimly. "And the Pentagon's approving it because the metrics look perfect." "Too perfect," he murmured. Sarah leaned back, exhausted. "You ever get tired of watching people sell integrity for convenience?" Morrison's voice was low. "Every day, but at least now we're doing something about it." The next morning, they submitted the first wave of findings to the Inspector General's office, the official oversight channel. It was supposed to be confidential, safe. By afternoon it was. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Sarah's access badge stopped working. Her Pentagon credentials had been temporarily suspended pending administrative clarification. The same hour, Morrison's assistant received a routine transfer notice, effective immediately. Sarah's hands clenched around the printed notice. "They're moving you out." He gave a tired sigh. "Reassigned to Strategic Review Command. On paper, it's a promotion." "But it's not." He shook his head. "It's containment." Sarah stared at him, disbelief turning to fury. "We followed protocol. We filed through proper channels." "Which means," Morrison said quietly, "we filed into their system." He paused. "Someone in that chain is protecting Henderson." That night, Sarah didn't go home. She sat in her car outside the Pentagon parking structure, watching the lights flicker against the stone walls. She thought she understood corruption, the distant, bureaucratic kind. But now she was seeing it up close. How it smiled. How it wore badges. How it spoke in polite tones while quietly erasing people who asked the wrong questions. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. You've made enemies you can't see. Stop while you still can." She exhaled slowly. Fear was there, but so was something stronger, defiance. She typed one line back. "If they're afraid of the truth, then I'm already winning." The following week, Sarah was reassigned to a different division, temporary evaluation duty, a windowless office in the basement, no direct reports, no classified access, just paperwork, the Pentagon's version of exile. She sat alone in the small, gray room, staring at the blank monitor. They thought they'd silenced her, but silence, she knew, could be a weapon too. She started making calls carefully. Former contacts, trusted field officers, soldiers she'd trained years ago. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. Henderson's influence wasn't just in defense contracts. It extended into logistics, supplies, even intelligence liaisons. They weren't just lying to get paid. They were shaping narratives, rewriting failures as success. And if no one stopped them, people would die believing in false victories. Morrison called her one night from an unlisted number. His voice was quieter now, strained. "They're reviewing the investigation. But Sarah, someone's leaking information about us." She froze. "What kind of information?" "Internal communications, meeting notes, even your field history." "My what?" "Your deployment records. Someone's questioning whether your final mission report from Kandahar was complete." Her stomach dropped. "They're weaponizing my past." "Yes," Morrison said softly. "They're going to use your guilt against you." She felt her throat tighten. That mission was the one thing she never spoke about. The operation that had gone wrong, the ambush, the loss of her team, the thing that had driven her to leave the SEALs in the first place. Now they were reopening it, not for justice but for leverage. The next morning, she was summoned again. Two men in suits. One introduced himself as an internal auditor. The other didn't bother giving a name. "Ms. Martinez," the first said smoothly, "we've received new information suggesting irregularities in your final field report from 2018. Her pulse slowed. "Irregularities?" "You failed to disclose the unauthorized use of secondary intel assets during the operation. That's a serious omission." She stared at him. "Because there was no secondary asset. That intel came directly from headquarters." He smiled faintly. "Then you won't mind providing a full deposition under oath." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't about Kandahar, is it? This is about Henderson." The man closed his file. "We ask the questions, Ms. Martinez." When they left, she sat alone for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from her. They were rewriting her story, turning her truth into ammunition. And yet, under the weight of it all, she felt a strange calm. They could smear her name, bury her reputation, but they couldn't rewrite what had actually happened. Her team had died because of a rushed mission, pushed through by leaders who valued deadlines over safety. The same mistake she just tried to stop. History was repeating itself, only this time she wasn't staying quiet. That night, she met Morrison in a small diner outside the city. No uniforms, no ranks, just two people caught in the machinery of something bigger. He looked tired, older. "They're going to try to discredit you," he said quietly. "It's already started." "I know," she said. "They're leaking my records." He nodded. "They're afraid. That means you're close." Sarah stirred her coffee, staring into the dark liquid. "I used to think courage meant running toward danger, but now I think it's just not running away when you're tired of fighting." Morrison smiled faintly. "That's the kind that lasts." She looked up. "You still with me?" "Always." They sat in silence for a while, two soldiers without uniforms, still serving something they couldn't name but refused to abandon. The next morning, she received a sealed envelope from a confidential source. Inside were copies of internal Henderson communications, real ones this time. emails between executives and government liaisons discussing risk mitigation through political partnerships. It was proof that Henderson's influence wasn't just economic, it was systemic. They were buying silence, one official at a time. She forwarded the files to Morrison through a secure line. "This is it," she said. "We take this higher." He hesitated. "Higher means louder. Are you ready for that?" She thought of her team, their faces, their laughter, the sound of gunfire in the dust. "I've been ready since the day I buried them." The next week was chaos. An anonymous whistleblower leak reached the Defense Oversight Committee. News networks picked up fragments of the story, mentions of contract irregularities, training fraud, and potential insider collusion. The Pentagon denied everything. Henderson issued a statement praising their commitment to national security. But the truth was out. Morrison was called to testify in a closed congressional hearing. Sarah wasn't invited. She watched the news feed from her apartment, the volume low, the image grainy. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The city was restless. When Morrison finally emerged from the building, reporters surrounded him. He didn't answer their questions, just walked past them with quiet dignity, eyes forward. Later that night, he called her. His voice was steady but tired. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. There was a long pause. Then softly he added, "They'll come after us harder now." "I know," she said, "but at least now they can't hide." For the first time in years, Sarah slept through the night. Not because everything was fixed, not because justice was guaranteed, but because she'd chosen her side fully, finally. The next morning she stood by the window, watching dawn break over Washington. The sky glowed pale gold, cutting through the fog. She whispered quietly to the city below. "You can bury truth, but it always finds light." And in that moment, she realized she wasn't the same woman who once stood invisible behind a coffee tray. She had become something far more dangerous to those in power. She had become heard. The silence after exposure was louder than any explosion. For days, Washington buzzed with rumors, half-truths, leaks, denials. No one said her name, but Sarah could feel it in every headline that used words like internal misconduct, unauthorized consultant activity, or security breach. The truth was out. But so was she. By Thursday, her Pentagon clearance was revoked. Pending inquiry, they said. Morrison's phone stopped connecting, his number suddenly unavailable. And when she showed up at the building, 2 guards she'd known for months wouldn't meet her eyes. She walked back to her car in the cold October wind, holding her badge in her hand. It no longer unlocked anything. She fought to tell the truth, and now she was invisible again. That night, she sat in her apartment surrounded by boxes she hadn't unpacked since moving in. The TV murmured in the background, politicians debating oversight, commentators speculating. None of them knew her name, but every word was about her. When the knock came, it was gentle but deliberate. Sarah froze. It was almost midnight. She moved quietly to the door, hand instinctively resting near the drawer where she kept her service pistol. "Who is it?" "It's me." The voice was hoarse, familiar. She opened the door. Morrison stood there, still in uniform, eyes shadowed and weary. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "They reassigned me again, effective immediately, overseas posting." Her chest tightened. "That's not a reassignment, that's exile." He nodded slowly. "They made it sound like a reward." "Where?" "Germany, liaison work, paper pushing." She let out a sharp breath. "They're removing every witness." "Not every," he said softly, looking at her. "You're still here. For now." He gave a faint, bitter smile. "You were right about Henderson. The committee verified the documents, but you know how this town works. they'll bury it under national interest. Sarah's hands curled into fists. So the system wins again. Not forever, he studied her carefully. There are people who still care, people watching what you did. She looked away. Watching doesn't change anything. No, he said, but it reminds them that truth still has a voice. When he left, she stood in the doorway long after his footsteps faded. She knew what his visit really meant: goodbye. Morrison was the last ally she had inside the building, and once he was gone, she'd be on her own. The next morning, her phone rang again. Unknown number. Ms. Martinez. Yes. This is Agent Dunn with Federal Security Investigations. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding your recent activities. Regarding what exactly? Classified material may have been mishandled. Please come in for debriefing. The phrasing was precise, too precise. This wasn't a request, it was containment. She arrived at the federal office that afternoon. The room was sterile, no clocks, no windows, no warmth. Dunn was polite, detached. His questions were surgical. How did you obtain the Henderson communications? I was given them anonymously. By whom? I don't know. Did you share them outside authorized channels? I shared them with General Morrison under direct chain of command. He nodded slowly, making notes. You understand this could constitute a breach of national security. Sarah leaned forward. National security or corporate security, because those aren't the same thing. He didn't answer, just closed his notebook. We'll be in touch. By evening, the whispers had turned to noise. A news anchor spoke of potential misconduct within a Pentagon analysis unit. Online forums speculated about a female insider. A photo of her walking out of the building circulated without caption, but anyone who knew could tell. She turned off the screen. There was no use running from the fallout. It had already found her. She spent that night writing not reports, not data, but her own account. The full truth. Everything from the Henderson investigation to the internal pressure, to the threats and leaks. A document that no one could twist. She saved it on an encrypted drive and slipped it into a small metal box. Not for revenge, for record. Because someday, someone would ask what happened, and she wanted the answer ready. 3 days later, Morrison called again. His voice was quiet but urgent. They're building a case against you, he said. Unauthorized data access, procedural violations, breach of confidentiality, the works. She closed her eyes. Of course they are. I tried to intervene, he said, but they've frozen my comms. Morrison, she said softly, you did enough. He was silent for a long time. Then with quiet intensity he said, don't disappear. Whatever they do, don't let them erase you. They can destroy your career, don't let them destroy your story. She smiled faintly. That's the one thing they can't have. The next morning, she received an email from a journalist, anonymous address, encrypted subject line. We know about Henderson. Meet me. Safe location, 2200 Potomac Docks. Her pulse quickened. A trap, maybe, but silence was worse. At 10 p.m., the air by the docks was cold and metallic, the river whispering against the pylons. A figure stood near the water, a woman in a dark jacket. You came, the woman said softly. I wasn't sure you would. Depends who you are. Let's just say someone who's been following the story you tried to tell. Sarah studied her face, calm, direct, tired. You want me to go on record? I want people to hear it in your words, without filters. Sarah hesitated. You'll never get it past clearance. The woman smiled faintly. I already have friends who have lost their jobs trying. I'm not scared of red tape. Sarah's chest tightened. It's not red tape you should fear. Then what? Silence. They talked for hours. Sarah told her everything: the Henderson project, the falsified training data, the internal suppression, the threats. She didn't exaggerate, didn't dramatize, Just truth, clean and unembellished. The journalist listened quietly, recording with an old analog device, off-grid, untraceable. When Sarah finished, she felt lighter and heavier all at once. "What will you do with it?" she asked. "Release it," the woman said, carefully, piece by piece. Sarah nodded slowly. "Then you'll need this." She handed over a copy of her encrypted drive, the full report. "If anything happens to me, this tells the rest." The journalist hesitated. "You're sure?" "Yes." "Why trust me?" "Because truth always needs someone willing to carry it when others drop it." That night, she returned home to find her apartment door slightly open. She froze. The lock wasn't broken, it had been used. She stepped inside quietly. Nothing looked stolen, but something felt wrong. Her laptop was gone. The drawer where she kept her weapon was empty. They weren't sending messages anymore. They were taking them. Sarah exhaled, forcing herself calm. Then she whispered not to the room but to whoever had been there. "You can take the tools, you can't take the truth." For the next week she vanished. No emails, no calls, no trace. Reporters kept digging, but there was no statement, no appearance. Some said she fled the country. Others said she was under protection. Only Morrison knew the truth. She wasn't hiding, she was watching. From a small coastal town miles away, she monitored the news from an encrypted laptop. The first part of her story had been released. Anonymous whistleblower exposes corporate government collusion. It was everywhere now. They couldn't bury it this time. When Morrison finally reached her through a secure channel, his voice was soft. "It's spreading," he said. "They're launching audits across 3 departments." She smiled faintly. "Then it was worth it." He hesitated. "They'll still come for you." "Let them," she said. "They've already taken everything that matters except meaning." There was silence. Then Morrison said something that stayed with her. "You remind me of something one of my mentors once said. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing the truth even when it leaves you standing alone." Sarah looked out over the dark ocean, waves crashing against the rocks. "I've stood alone before," she said softly, "but this time I'm not invisible." A week later, the journalist's full exposé went public. Names, contracts, dates, proof. The scandal broke across every major outlet. Henderson's CEO resigned. Congressional hearings reopened. Internal investigations reinstated. Sarah's name wasn't mentioned, but her fingerprints were everywhere. The truth was no longer buried. It was burning through walls. And somewhere in a quiet coastal motel room, Sarah sat by the window, watching dawn rise over the water, her reflection faint, but unbroken. She'd lost her career, her security, her anonymity. But she'd won something far greater. Her voice. That morning she opened her notebook, a single page written in careful ink. "They can take your rank, your uniform, your badge, but they can't take the reason you wore them." She closed it gently, a small smile forming as she whispered to herself. Sometimes, victory isn't about surviving the fight. It's about making sure the fight meant something. The world didn't change overnight. It never does. But it did notice. In the months that followed the Henderson exposé, Washington reeled from the shockwaves. Hearings reopened. Contracts suspended. Oversight committees doubled their staff. Officials who once looked untouchable were suddenly answering questions under oath. It wasn't revolution. It was correction. And for once, truth had the microphone. But Sarah didn't watch it unfold from the city. She stayed away somewhere quiet where the noise couldn't reach. A small house near the Virginia coastline, salt on the wind, a porch that creaked when you leaned too far forward. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was peace, something she hadn't known in years. Each morning, she walked along the beach before sunrise. Barefoot, her footprints trailing behind her until the waves erased them. Sometimes she thought of that as a kind of mercy, proof that not every mark we leave has to be permanent. She didn't check the news much anymore. The story had taken on a life of its own. The journalist she'd met, the woman at the docks, had become the face of the investigation. She was careful never to reveal her source, though everyone suspected there was one. Sarah didn't mind. She didn't need credit. She only needed to know the truth had survived. Still, on quiet nights, she wondered how Morrison was doing. The last time they spoke, he'd been reassigned again, this time voluntarily, an advisory role in NATO. He'd called it a graceful exit. She called it exile with better scenery. Before leaving, he'd told her something that still echoed when she couldn't sleep. You can't fix every system, Sarah, but you can remind it what it was meant to be. She'd held onto those words tighter than her trident pin. One afternoon, months later, she received a plain envelope in the mail. No return address, just her name written in deliberate handwriting. Inside was a photograph, grainy, printed from a news article. It showed a congressional committee hearing. Morrison was there testifying. In the background behind him was her report, the one they'd tried to bury. Stamped across the top, entered into official record. She read those 4 words over and over, her throat tightening. For the first time in years, she let herself cry. Quietly. Not from sadness, not even relief, but from the strange, aching peace that comes when a wound finally closes. Later that evening, she drove into town. The small cafe near the harbor was half empty, fishermen, retirees, a few students with laptops. The kind of place where nobody cared who you were, only that you paid for your coffee and left your seat clean. She ordered her usual black, no sugar, and sat near the window, watching the water shift with the fading light. A man at the next table was reading the paper. The headline caught her eye. Defense Reform Bill passes with bipartisan support, new safeguards for military contracts. She smiled faintly. Finally, she whispered. The man looked up. You say something. She shook her head. Just took a long time coming. He nodded absently and went back to reading. She took a sip of coffee, the bitter taste grounding her. A memory flashed, the same boardroom, the same smell of coffee she once served, and the same kind of men who hadn't seen her then. Funny how full circles never announced themselves. They just happened quietly when you weren't looking. That night she walked down to the pier, the air cool and still. The moon hung low over the water, silver and silent. She pulled a small object from her pocket, the trident pin, worn smooth, edges dulled. For a long time, she just held it in her palm. She thought about the people it represented, her team, the ones who never made it home, the laughter before missions, the fear they never admitted, the loyalty that had outlived them all. I didn't forget, she said softly to the wind. I never will. Then she crouched by the edge of the pier and let the pin fall from her hand. It slipped into the dark water with barely a ripple. It wasn't lost this time, it was release. In the weeks that followed, she began teaching part-time at a nearby academy, leadership ethics, crisis decision-making, operational psychology. She never introduced herself with rank or history. To the cadets, she was just Professor Martinez. One day, a young woman stayed after class. She looked nervous, clutching her notebook. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I read about the whistleblower case last year, the one that changed the defense oversight laws. I just wanted to say, whoever did that, they gave people like us hope." Sarah smiled gently. Then whoever did it would be proud to hear that. The girl nodded. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if doing the right thing is even worth it, if it costs everything." Sarah looked at her, really looked. Young, determined. The same fire she once had before the years dulled it into something steadier. She said softly, "Doing the right thing always costs something, but so does doing nothing. You just don't feel that cost until it's too late. The cadet blinked as if trying to memorize the words. "Thank you, ma'am." Sarah smiled. "Thank you for asking." Later, walking home through the evening light, she thought about that conversation, about how cycles repeated, courage passing quietly from one person to the next, like a secret. It wasn't about being seen. It never had been. It was about being heard by the people who came after. And she realized something then. The mission had never really ended. It had just changed shape. Months passed, seasons turned. The investigation reached its end. Several officials resigned. Henderson's remaining board was dissolved. A public statement acknowledged procedural failures, bureaucratic language for things that once got people killed. But there was no mention of her name, no medals, no apologies, no recognition. And somehow that felt right. Because this time, silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. One morning, nearly a year after the first investigation began, she received a letter from Morrison, handwritten as always. "Sarah, I thought you should know they've implemented your risk protocols across 3 divisions. Quietly, of course, but it's official now. You changed the standard. I'm retiring next month. Europe's beautiful but quieter than I like. Maybe I'll visit Virginia when I'm back. I still owe you a coffee." "Em." She smiled at the note, folding it carefully. It joined a small stack of letters on her desk, the only souvenirs of a war fought without guns. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood again by the water. The wind was cool, steady. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. No gunfire. No orders. No noise. Just the hum of the tide and the distant call of a gull. For the first time since leaving the Navy, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something, redemption, justice, closure. She was already living it. She thought of her journey from being dismissed at a coffee table to standing against generals and contracts, from silence to voice, from guilt to grace. And she realized all of it had been worth it, not because she won, but because she stayed human through it all. That was the victory. Later that night, she sat on her porch with a cup of coffee. The sky stretched wide and endless above her, stars scattered like forgotten medals. She spoke softly, half to herself, half to the ghost she carried. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She smiled at the words, closing her eyes as the wind moved gently through the trees. And in that quiet, unremarkable moment, far from headlines, far from war, Sarah Martinez finally found what she'd been searching for since the day she walked away from the battlefield. Not recognition, not revenge, but peace earned the hard way, through truth, loss, and the quiet power of a conscience that refused to fade. The kind of peace that no one could ever take from her.